Hail to the king, baby. This is Mostly Movies, where we mostly discuss movies, mostly. I'm Dan Siri, and as you see, I'm wearing the Ash Williams shirt. It's the 30th anniversary of Army of Darkness. Great movie. I first saw it many years ago. It was on VHS. We rented it from West Coast Video. My brother-in-law, Phil, who's a wonderful man, Phil Sinclair, and a great movie mentor who taught me everything about horror films and just comedies and bizarre movies that I probably would have never seen. So big shout out to Phil for showing me Army of Darkness when I was the tender age of, I believe, 15 at the time, and I just absolutely loved it. I thought it was amazing. Now, this was a time in 1995 when you couldn't quite find Evil Dead or Evil Dead 2. I mean, one video store we did find Evil Dead 2. It was an old copy, but Evil Dead 1 in the mid-90s was pretty hard to find, believe it or not. Now, a couple of years earlier, it was very easy to find in any video store. But I didn't end up seeing Evil Dead. I did see Evil Dead 2 a couple months after Army of Darkness, which Evil Dead 2 is great. That's the one right before Army of Darkness. But Evil Dead 1 I didn't end up seeing till I believe the DVDs came out around maybe late 90s, early 2000s. As late as 2001, I would say. But I can't say enough good things about Army of Darkness. It's one of my favorite movies. It's got action, adventure, humor. It's actually would have been a big hit today because the way that today's action movies balance fantasy with action and humor, this movie does it. It's basically a really great Marvel movie, basically. But it's even funnier than that because I think the only Marvel movies that are even half as funny as Army of Darkness would probably be the Guardians pictures. Most of the comedy in Marvel movies is of the bad Bob Hope variety, as we saw this year, in fact, because this is the 2022 year in review video of Mostly Movies, where I'm going to talk about all the major disappointments, most of which were from Disney, and the year that we saw the real decline of Marvel. It was easy to say, oh, well, the Eternals wasn't that great, or Black Widow wasn't that great, and just easily write them off. But when the real heavy hitters start, failing us, Doctor Strange was okay and fun for what it was, but it really threw a monkey wrench into WandaVision, which was one of the only interesting things to come out of Marvel Phase 4. So it's one of those movies that's entertaining while you're watching it, and then you think about it afterwards, you're like, well, they totally destroyed WandaVision. Okay. And then Thor: Love and Thunder, which I was really anticipating, was one of the weaker films of this year. But overall, last thoughts about Army of Darkness. It's an amazing movie. Seek it out. The entire Evil Dead trilogy is great. First one's a little hard to stomach. The second one's a little rough too, but they're both great. And I like Army of Darkness the best of the three. Well, they were all pretty good, but Army of Darkness, I think, will always be my favorite. And I just remember it was my brother John's birthday. We rented it from West Coast Video. We had a few friends over, and around the time it was the after party time. And once again, my brother-in-law Phil's like, we got to put this movie on. Just stop everything. We're all going to watch Army of Darkness. And we just basically, it was me, my brothers, my sister-in-law, my sister was there too, and we just couldn't stop laughing. This movie is just a masterpiece. And I don't throw that word around too often, but I just love it. It's great. It's really, really amazing. I met Bruce Campbell on a few occasions at book signings in Fangoria. The few times I interacted with him, met him, he's a wonderful man, very good to his fans. He really goes out of his way. So God bless you, Bruce, wherever you are. So, 2022. The worst year in mainstream cinema, perhaps in my lifetime. 1992 was pretty bad, but you still had Aladdin, you still had Glengarry Glen Ross, you still had Reservoir Dogs, El Mariachi, and several others. 2020 was a pretty bad year, too, because a lot of stuff was delayed, and whatever did come out wasn't really that impressive. I couldn't even come up with a top 5 that year. A lot of the better movies were delayed till 2021. So I saw roughly in the range of 39 to 40 films. It would have been two more, but I watched an hour of Tar and I had enough. It was just boring as sin. And Wakanda Forever was boring and convoluted and bizarre. I watched an hour of it. I gave it an hour. I only usually give a movie that's boring me to death about 40 minutes, like the length of a TV show. And Wakanda Forever was just confusing and convoluted. The changes to Namor's origin were crap, stupid. And you know what gets me about the whole Namor thing? I never bought for a second that was Prince Namor, the King of Atlantis. Never bought it once. He just looked really, a lot of these modern actors, these guys, they just don't sell the tough guy. Like, I don't believe this guy could run anything, let alone, Atlantis. So, Wakanda Forever, I don't think I'm ever going to finish it. I gave it about an hour, and I'm like, that's enough. I don't like these movies where it's like some teenage scientist is like the key to everything. It's like, are you serious? You mean to tell me that this kid built an Iron Man suit, the vibranium detector, all that stuff? It's just silly. I don't buy it for a second. And there can be brilliant kids, yes, but they're also funny. They're also got charisma. Nah, maybe if the kid was like nerdier or something, I would have bought it. But overall, without Chadwick Boseman, the movie's just really pointless. And I feel bad because I really missed him, and I really liked the first Black Panther a lot. I thought it was very good. And it's a shame. The whole entire Marvel experiment will always have the 22. From Iron Man to Endgame, we'll always have the 22. And that's about as far as I go. I still will see Guardians. That's probably the last one I'll see in theaters, Guardians 3. But I'm not that interested in Ant-Man. I mean, I'll see it. I'll give it an hour on Disney+. Hopefully it'll hold my interest. So how I do my top fives is basically I break into three categories. The good, the bad, and the ugly, or Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradise. Because there are films that are just bad, that are just garbage, that you're never going to watch again, that you just total complete waste of time. And then there are films that are the purgatory variety, which are films that I have problems with, I have major problems with, but they entertain me, but they also frustrated me. And I can't say I hated them, but there's major flaws and major problems. But they're still worth talking about. You see, like a film like Star Trek V, Batman Returns, Dune, like these are very problematic films. These are movies that are very, very messy. But you can tell that whoever made them was brilliant and had a vision and was really going for it. It just didn't work out. And you can feel it on the screen. So let's talk about dishonorable mentions for the worst films of 2022. These are the dishonorable mentions that were bad, but not quite bad enough into the 5 list of the 5 movies that pissed me off the most in 2022. Thor: Love and Thunder, a mess. Just a messy film. Surprisingly, I loved Jojo Rabbit. Jojo Rabbit was my favorite film of 2019. It just beat Yesterday by a hair, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was third. But it was a brilliant film. And to think that that guy who made such a brilliant film that was Chaplin-level satire could make this really dark, really nasty, cynical film parading as a comedy. It was too serious to be any fun and too funny to be serious. And again, not funny like a real good comedy, but really corny, silly jokes that didn't work at all. Disney Pinocchio. Really, really sick of these terrible, terrible Disney remakes, and this is the worst one yet. I mean, I liked Cinderella, I liked Beauty and the Beast, and that's about as far as it goes. Then it's like, don't do the remake thing for a while. Give it a rest. Maybe every 10 years come out with 2 or 3. But they're basically like the direct-to-video Disney sequels of the 90s, that were like Little Mermaid 2 and all that. They were just as useless. Barbarian, a horror film. Again, this almost made the Purgatory list. It's on the Inferno list. It almost made Purgatory, but it just really, really lost me in the second half. And by the end of it, I just hated this film. Turning Red basically was the equivalent of me standing in the feminine products aisle at the supermarket. I mean, this was a very bizarre, weird, and very uncomfortable film. I don't even think a young girl who this is targeted at, I'm not the target audience, but I try to be open-minded. I don't even think a young girl would feel very comfortable watching this movie. It's just a really strange, bizarre, again, disrespect to parents. Disney is a Disney trope in the last 20 years where all the movies, even the good ones, have a lot of disrespect and a lot of, well, you got to not listen to your parents type of stuff. And I don't know, maybe I'm getting old, but that's not really cute anymore. Ticket to Paradise with George Clooney. It was good to see George Clooney team up with Julia Roberts, but it just didn't work for me. And what really made me hate this movie more is I recently rewatched Up in the Air, which is a film that I liked when I first saw it. I saw it again. I liked it a lot more. And I realized, I'm like, you know what? Ticket to Paradise was even worse than I realized. But these are the top five films that made me mad. Number 5 is Lightyear. Now, I was already mad going into Lightyear because there was a disastrous screening of G.I. Joe the movie, which I walked out of because they were using like a VHS master, and it looked like somebody got an old VHS tape and put it on the projector. It looked and sounded awful. Basically, that's it for me with Fathom Events. I just don't trust them anymore after what happened with The Thing, Flash Gordon, and G.I. Joe the movie. So I said, well, I might as well see something. Top Gun Maverick doesn't start for another hour, so I walked into Lightyear. How bad could it be? It's bad. This movie has no soul. Not one joke is funny. The animation is weird. You know, the fat-faced Disney animation just isn't cute anymore, and this movie is just ridiculous, and it's silly. And there's just a lot of just nonsense. The whole movie is nonsense. Then at the end, they have this really big twist, and you're like, oh, wow, this is interesting. This is going to have to explain this. But no, it's the J.J. Abrams Science School. Present something cool, never explain it, and hope you forget about it and watch the rest of the movie with a big smile on your face. Nope. The theater, the few people that were in the theater, the kids were on there, were basically shifting in their seats, and all the parents were on their phones. No one was entertained by this boring, boring film. Number 4, this one hurts, because you guys know how I love Rob Zombie's films, and I think I've liked all of his films, even ones that are hated, like 31, I've still liked, and Lords of Salem I like a lot, which a lot of people don't like it. Very disappointed that The Munsters was a complete disaster. I mean, the trailers looked really bad, and I'm like, oh, well, I trust Rob. He's got something up his sleeve. He didn't, and I feel so bad because I love his films. Devil's Rejects is one of my favorites. I loved all the references to the Marx Brothers, who I adore. So I was very disappointed with that. Unfortunately, that one didn't work out for me. Number 3 is The Northman. This movie, a lot of people told me this movie's great. You got to see it. It's sort of like Braveheart and everything. I didn't like this movie. I felt like it started off great, and it was very interesting. And then basically the villain of the piece, who seems to get one over on the good guy and become rich and become this big landowner, he more or less loses his fortune, becomes a sheep farmer, yet this guy still wants revenge on him after all these years. And it's sort of like just really strange. I'm like, all right, forget it. This is just not for me. Does it look beautiful? Yes. There are good performances? Yes. But the movie is pretty much nonsense. Number 2 worst film of 2022 is just called Texas Chainsaw. It's supposed to be a Dave Gordon Green, ripping off of Dave Gordon Green's Halloween. They're trying to bring back Sally and Leatherface and make a real sequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because a lot of people have been trying to reinvent the wheel with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. What made Texas Chainsaw Massacre the greatest American horror film ever made was this. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a brilliant mix of horror, comedy, and a lot more social commentary than people realized. A lot of it was about the Vietnam era and what was going on in America. And that America, sometimes your own backyard in America, is as dangerous as the jungles of Vietnam. And if you're a young person, you still run the risk of stumbling upon death and mayhem and insanity. And it's a brilliant film. And there are moments in that movie. It's a terrifying film. It's one of the scariest films I've ever seen. The original from 1974, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But there are moments in the movie that are laugh out loud funny. Even some of the scenes where the bad guys are kind of like tormenting the girl and teasing her and like telling her they're going to get her are funny scenes. And I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, but like Gremlins 2, they leaned forward into the comedy. They didn't walk that fine tightrope between comedy and horror. They lean, and I don't blame them, because it's very hard to walk that tightrope, and it's almost impossible to pull it off. And Toby Hooper, not Maguire, Toby Hooper did the impossible with the original Texas Chainsaw by basically walking that tightrope to of comedy and horror. The second one leaned more into the comedy, and then all the other ones since have just didn't know what they were doing, and they just tried to do the horror thing and take it seriously, like even the remake from 2004, which wasn't too bad. But then the reboot in 2012 was pretty bad. Oh man, I could do a whole video on that movie. What nonsense, the 3D one. But this is the moment you've all been waiting for. The worst film of 2022 is Scream 5. I saw it early in the year. Me and Chris Barryman went to see it. Just an absolute terrible film in every way. I think we covered it pretty good on the channel already, but again, complete nonsense. Just the very worst of today's movies in this film. It's just a complete and utter disaster. Now, we're going to the next part. This is the purgatory movies. These are movies that are basically, that very comfortably numb rating of 2.5 stars. Meaning, like, I kind of sort of acknowledge this movie, but it just didn't quite have the greatness of it. 3,000 Years of Longing, great. I mean, this is the 2.5 to 3 star range. What that basically means is, okay, I wasn't tortured while I watched this film, but I don't really care to ever really see it again. It doesn't really mean anything to me. It's disposable. Smile, Black Adam. Black Adam, though, did have a lot of entertaining moments in it, but it was one of those movies you walk away from and like, I had fun watching this, and then it completely leaves your brain. It's like an ice cream. It's like a nice ice cream. You enjoy it while it's happening, and then you just forget all about it. Doctor Strange is sort of one that kind of fell into this category, which I liked a lot when I first saw it, but the more I thought of WandaVision and how much I liked that show, and I thought how this sort of negated that whole thing, I'm like, I have no desire to see it again. Like, I didn't have a horrible time watching it, but it's not a movie you want to watch again. Another one, as part of the not so honorable mentions, is Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Okay, a vision for sure. Brilliant, yes. Not for me. I think he's a genius, Del Toro. I think he's great visually, and he has moments that are fantastic. But most of his movies sort of more or less kind of leave me cold. I don't hate them. I acknowledge there's a great vision and a great artist at work. It's just not my bag. But these are the 5 of the purgatory films. The films, the almost goods, made by good directors, well made, with some brilliant scenes, but just didn't really work for me. Number 5 is The Fabelmans by Steven Spielberg. Okay, I wouldn't see this in theaters because I thought, well, this is too precious. I mean, this guy's basically making a biopic about himself, but he can fudge the details around because it's not really his life, but it is his life. And I don't like that because, I mean, I'm not a big biopic fan to begin with, but if you're going to make a biopic about yourself, you can make it more interesting. And I felt that the first half of this film was brilliant. It was very interesting. Steven Spielberg, wow, he hasn't lost it. He's still great. The second half completely fell apart for me. It became really boring once they got to California. The cameo at the end, I won't say who it is. Very famous director played by a very famous director, is a good scene. It is a very good scene. But like my dad said it best, he says, this should have been a streaming show. This could have been the first 2 episodes, and then you could have made about 4 or 5 more that could have shown like the journey to Hollywood and making these films and make a movie like Jaws but not Jaws. And that would have been interesting, and that could have been how you ended it. And like talk about like doing like, when he did Night Gallery, Spielberg, with Joan Crawford. But you'd have to change a few things around. You can make it like Bette Davis. You can make it a different show because it's like a different thing. Yeah, it could have been very different, and it just really lost me. Also, too, I felt like the movie really didn't paint Spielberg's mom in the best light. I think they kind of made her look... And Michelle Williams is good in the movie. Very good, as always. She's wonderful. But it just didn't really work for me. And I'm not closing the book on Steven Spielberg. I closed the book on Ridley Scott after Alien Covenant. I probably won't see any of his films anymore, anything new. I will go back and watch Blade Runner and Alien at least twice a year. Those films are great. And I love Legend, and I love a lot of his films. But I'm not that interested to see what he does next. Spielberg, I'll still hold out hope for him. I think he still has one more great film, even though he hasn't made a movie that has really knocked me out since 2005 with Munich. That was his last film that was just brilliant. Spielberg was great in the 70s and 80s, great in the 90s too, although he didn't make many films in the 90s. In the 2000s, in the early 2000s, he was hot. He was making Minority Report and Catch Me If You Can and War of the Worlds and Munich. He was just really doing great. And then after that, he just sort of lost his edge for me. And his last couple of movies have had moments of Spielberg magic, but mostly been the white noise from Poltergeist. Number 4 of the Purgatory films is a film called Mad God. This is a movie that was on Shudder. I believe it's still there. It's directed by Phil Tippett, who's a genius stop-motion animator. Again, brilliant vision. He's a brilliant guy. And his work on Star Wars and several other movies have been fantastic visual effects work. The movie is twisted. This is a very, not for the faint of heart. But again, there are moments in it I love. And again, it has a vision, but it just doesn't quite really get through to me. It's not a movie I want to write off, though. See, all the movies on this list are movies that I probably would watch again at some point. Maybe not Fablemans, but most of the movies on this list, I would give it another shot at some point. Number 3 is RRR. This is a film from India. Suffers from one of the biggest enemies of movie audience and moviegoers in 2022 was these very long movies. This film is 3 hours long. It didn't need to be 3 hours long. When you make a film that's over 2 hours, it better be great. And if it's over 2.5 hours, it better be a masterpiece. This isn't a masterpiece. It's just really long. And they could have easily cut about 45 minutes to an hour out of this film, and I think it would have had a lot more impact. The singing, dancing sequences are amazing. A lot of the action sequences are great. But again, and it's very original. Also, too, when I read up on it and I saw that they kind of fudged the facts and the history, I feel like, again, I don't like too much when they do that, especially when there's things like violent deaths in a film. When you fudge with the facts, it just kind of leaves a sour taste in my mouth. Number 2 on the Purgatory list is Violent Night. Again, this is a movie that had some really good moments in it. David Harbour is great. I really like him a lot. I think he's a really good actor. I really enjoy him on Stranger Things and other shows and movies I've seen him in. This movie, just overall, it just runs out of gas. It basically, the last 45 minutes is just dead air. But it's entertaining and it's fun. Again, fun while you watch it for the most part, until the ending becomes pretty boring. But that's all I have to say about Violent Night. Now, number 1, this is going to get some nerds confused. Generation X has a Godfather 3. We have one. It's not The Phantom Menace. It's not some of these bad Marvel movies we've been getting lately. We have our own Godfather 3, and it's Clerks 3. This movie was one of the... There are movies on my best list that I've only seen once. This movie, it's not quite on the bad list. It's on the purgatory list, meaning like, 2.5 starville. This is a movie that to me, there could have been a great movie in here. There could have really been something special, something really powerful. And Kevin Smith, honestly, between this and Masters of the Universe, which completely blew it in the second half, I did like the first half, and I felt like, well, he's got something good going here. He's got something up his sleeve. And then you watch the second half of Masters of the Universe, and you're like, nope. That was a major disappointment. What makes this movie a major disappointment was I hated the beginning. The middle was pretty good, and I actually did like the ending in theory overall. The problem is the ending feels completely unearned because 2/3 of this movie is sort of not that great. So you can't make a bad movie, a mediocre movie, and then end it great and get away with it. If that makes any sense. The way The Godfather, the beginning is meh, the middle is amazing, and the ending is meh. This is sort of like meh, meh, good. And it's like, I don't know what he was going for. He pretty much already did everything he had to do in this movie and Jay and Silent Bob reboot, which, again, it's not a classic, but it's fun, it's entertaining, the reboot of Jay and Silent Bob. And again, it doesn't really help, but it doesn't really hurt. This film hurt. I watched this movie, I was baffled by this film. I watched it 3 times. And again, on my 10 best list, there are some movies that I only watched once. And I really should have watched again to even consider them for the 10 best. But this was a movie that it really was stuck in my head for a couple of days because so much about it I loved and so much about it pissed me off. And it was disrespectful, I felt, to the fans. We're living in an age where this is going to contain a major spoiler. They're killing our heroes, man. They killed Luke Skywalker. They killed Han Solo. They killed the guy, more movie spoilers. They killed, what's his name, in Unbreakable. My brother just told me that the other day because I never saw Glass. They killed James Bond, for goodness sake, in that terrible James Bond film, No Time to Die, which was just a piece of crap. What was so bad about that movie, too, is that it made me never want to watch the Daniel Craig movies again. And the Daniel Craig movies were pretty great, especially Skyfall and Casino Royale. Casino Royale is my favorite Bond film. But you know what? I don't want to watch it again because they totally ruined it in that last movie. They're killing our heroes left and right. How can you kill Dante? I mean, that to me is really, really low. That's just stupid and annoying, and I didn't like that they did that. I thought that was a really dumb idea. But again, I can't just call the movie... What baffles me is a lot of the fans who hate Kevin Smith now. Most of his fans don't like him anymore. I'm still a fan of his. I still liked Tusk and a lot of his recent movies that have been pretty dreadful, but I've loved them. This movie really, really leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I think that it's really negative. Too much Elias. Elias did not need to come back for this movie. There are some moments in this movie that are very funny. Jay and Silent Bob are very funny in this film, as always. But there's a lot of real dead weight scenes that don't work. And I think there's a little too much of Ed Wood and the disaster artist in there. And I just felt like, to me, the ending, though, when Dante is watching this film and he's kind of between this world and the next, and when he's watching it in the theater, and he's watching the original Clerks film, okay, there was some geeky tears there. Because, again, this is a very conflicting movie. Because you know what it is, guys? Star Wars is everybody's. Indiana Jones, Ghostbusters, the Marvel movies, the DC movies, they belong to the world. But Clerks was ours. You know? People of my generation, people of Generation X, and that remember the 90s. And the great films we had in the 90s and the great independent movies. Because look, Independence Day belonged to the world. Jurassic Park belonged to the world. But movies like Suburbia, movies like Clerks, movies like Mallrats, movies like Chasing Amy, movies like Empire Records, they were ours. They belonged to us and us alone. Bunch of friends getting into a room or a basement and watching Angus or watching, you know, any one of these movies, Detroit Rock City, The Stoned Age. These were movies that were made for us, for our generation. And for somebody to come along and take something that was so near and dear to us and just say, here you go, you know, and give it back to you like that. And you're like, I still have it, but it's broken. You know, it's just really, really depressing. It's like, you already ruined the 70s and 80s. Now you're trying to ruin the 90s. And it's like the 90s is all we have left, man. Like, leave it alone. Leave those movies alone. And I don't hate Kevin Smith for making Clerks 3. And there are moments in it that I love. Overall, it didn't quite make it for me. I was very on the fence with this film, between liking it and not liking it. But I can't ignore it. And I just think that making this movie was wrong. Yeah, Kevin Smith is too good a filmmaker to waste his time ruining Clerks. And even if he made a sequel to Mallrats and it was crap, who cares? Even if he made other stuff and it was... But Clerks is just so personal to us. There was something very grungy, very underground about it that even other Kevin Smith films didn't quite have that quality of being the grungy underground film, you know? And I just feel like it was exploitation of the fans and of the property. But that's enough about Clerks 3. Anybody else wants to talk to me about Clerks 3, we'll just meet up at the bar and we'll talk about it for a couple of hours. But now we're talking about the good films, Paradiso of 2022. Although I can't really say paradise because this was a bad year for movies. Let's be honest. 2022 was bad. And this is the best of a bad year. These are really good films, don't get me wrong. But in most years, these wouldn't even be in your top 10 list. So these are my honorable mentions, then I'll get to my top 5. No particular order. The Terrifier 2, great horror movie. I thought this was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it a lot. It's too long, like most movies of this last year, but I did like it. It is very sickening and very twisted, but very original too. I liked it a lot. All Quiet on the Western Front, great war movie. Very hard to watch, very depressing, and as I get older, I'm losing my taste for war films. I can acknowledge that they're well made, like Hacksaw Ridge and Saving Private Ryan and things. I can acknowledge that they're well made and they're well crafted and brilliantly made and acted, but I have trouble with real world violence. I'll watch a million gangster movies, a million horror movies with fake violence, but real world violence and the exploitation of the poor in war really bothers me, because it's your poor kids that go off and fight these wars, and I don't like seeing it. It's very upsetting for me. I could sit through the Terrifier 2 easier than All Quiet on the Western Front, because All Quiet on the Western Front is about something real and something horrific, whereas Terrifier 2 is just like a horror fantasy. The Batman. Okay, if we didn't have all the Tim Burtons and the Schumachers and the Nolan films and Batman v Superman and Justice League and then the 4-hour epic mega Justice League beast that we got a few years ago, I would have really been a lot more excited for this film. It's very well made. I do love the detective aspect of it. The way the Joker borrowed too much from Zodiac, from King of Comedy and Taxi Driver, this movie borrows too much from Zodiac and Seven. And I think with Batman, you can go to the edge, but I think when you get into like Zodiac or Seven territory, it gets a little bit much. Again, the movie's way too long. It would have been much better if it was shorter by about 45 minutes, because the beginning and ending are very good, but there's a big midsection that can just get right out of there. I didn't really care for the Riddler as this like weird guy that looks like the Gimp. That was just a little strange to me. Overall, it was good. But, you know, again, I enjoyed it while I watched it. I haven't had any much desire to see it again. For documentaries, I loved This Is Gwar. Again, I'm not an expert on their music. I don't know that much about them. I know of them. This was a great documentary, though, because you see the work and the craft that goes into their insane shows and music. And I have to appreciate it. Again, it's not my style of music. I don't think I'm going to be at the mosh pit at the next War show. But this film was very interesting, and I learned a lot about this band and the people that were in the band, and great movie. It's on, I believe it's still on Shudder. Check it out. And then here's another one that's controversial, and it is a sick film, but I thought it was one of the funniest films I've ever seen, Jackass Forever. This movie is like the other Jackass movies and the show, sick, twisted, wrong, yet why am I laughing so hard? Why can I not breathe because I'm falling out of my chair laughing at how insane this movie was? And in the theater, I never saw any Jackass movies in the theater. The other three I saw on DVD. You got to see this movie on the big screen with an audience. It is hysterical. Okay, but we're going to get right now to my top 5 films of 2022. Number 5, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Now, there's a lot of stuff in this movie that bothers me. It's a lot of weird stuff, a lot of strange things in this movie, but it's funny. It reminded me a little bit of Cloud Atlas, just with more humor and more violence. There are moments in it that are brilliant and really good, and overall, even though there's a lot of stuff in there, there's a lot of fat that you can cut in this movie. Again, 2.5 hours. It's a 2022 movie, so it's long. But overall, I really liked this one. I thought it was a lot of fun. Very interesting movie. Ke-Huy Quan, Michelle Yeoh is great. I've always loved her since Tomorrow Never Dies. And then I saw other films with her from China that were great. Ke-Huy Quan gives one of the best performances we've seen in years. And it was so good to see him again because he's in 2 of my favorite movies, The Goonies and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. It's great to see him back again. So that's a good one. Number 4 is a Netflix movie called Apollo 10.5. This is an animated film by Richard Linklater. This is a great movie. I like this one a lot. Again, I felt it should have been up for Best Animated Film. It's one of Linklater's best films, and it just doesn't get enough notice or credit. But people that grew up in suburbia in the 70s or that around that time can really relate to this film. And I think that it's a movie to watch with your folks. This is a really great film. And I love space and I love the Apollo program and it just fascinates me. So this movie was great looking at it through the eyes of a child. Brilliant, brilliant filmmaking. Number 3, the best of 2022. Number 3 is The Black Phone. This is a great film based on a very good short story by Joe Hill. This is the first time Hollywood has gotten Joe Hill right. And I saw this film many months ago. And it's one of the best horror films in years. Great movie. I love it. Number 2 was a big surprise for me. This is a film called Vengeance. It's on Amazon Prime as we speak. It was on Peacock for a while. BJ Novak plays a podcaster who's investigating a murder and he wants to make a show about it. This film is like Network for podcasts. It's really smart. It's really funny. It was almost like, basically, I wouldn't, maybe I'm going too far with this, but I think of this film as Chinatown for the podcast generation. This movie is really good. It's really on the pulse of everything that's going on in our world right now, and it's definitely worth checking out. It's a great movie. I think BJ Novak wrote and directed it, too. Does a bang-up job, and he's great as acting in the movie as well. A movie that I don't think got enough notice. I loved it. Number 2. Number 1, the number 1 film of 2022 is Top Gun Maverick. Again, it's a tricky year for movies when the best film of the year is a sequel to Top Gun. But my goodness, I love this film. I absolutely loved it. Much better than the original. The original is one of those movies that is okay, but it's sort of a classic by default. Meaning the later half of the 80s, you didn't have that many, you didn't have movies like the bottom half of the 80s, like you had the Blues Brothers and Raiders of the Lost Ark, Empire Strikes Back, E.T., those big heavy hitters. You get to the late 80s, the pickings get a little slim. You had no Star Wars movie that summer, and we all thought we were going to get another one because it was happening every 3 years. And then we didn't get a Star Wars movie in 1986, but we got Top Gun and Big Trouble in Little China. But this film, to me, was It was great. It wasn't just a remembrance of the original Top Gun, but to me, it was kind of like remembering the 80s, but in a good way. Not necessarily this faux nostalgia where everybody had these big hairdos and things like that. I just thought that it was a really great film. And I think Tom Cruise has aged. He still looks great, but it's great to see him that at this point in his life, he can still make movies and he can still make the top grossing movie of the year as a Tom Cruise movie. And I give him credit for that, as crazy as he is. So Top Gun Maverick is the best film of 2022, in my opinion. And remember, these are just my opinions. I could be wrong. There is no right or wrong. There's just opinions. Then there was a couple of other movies. Real quick, I'll run through them. These are just other movies that didn't quite make any list that I saw this year. Marry Me, that was okay. You know, I was kind of... I wouldn't say I was dragged to it because I just wanted to see, I was curious to see Owen Wilson with J-Lo, which is preposterous, yet Owen Wilson is so charming, he can make any movie work. And I thought it was fun. Cyrano was good, extremely depressing, as it should be. Sonic 2 was all right. I never saw Sonic 1. The problem with video game movies is I'd rather be playing the video game than watching a movie about it. Elvis, well acted, well made, a real bummer of a film. Depressing. It's still good, but it's not as good as the John Carpenter one from the 70s with Kurt Russell. DC League of Super Pets. Some great moments, some fun scenes with the pets of the superheroes. You know, kind of a throwaway movie. Rescued by Ruby. This was on Netflix. It was about a rescue dog. It was I believe, in a soldier or something like that. It was okay. It was good. Pray for the Devil was a throwaway horror film. I didn't like it. Glass Onion. Ryan Johnson's films are a little too quirky for their own good. Like, I enjoyed this film while I watched it, and then later on, like, it annoyed me in hindsight. Does that make any sense to you guys? Where it's like, oh, this is kind of fun and quirky. And then later on, after the movie had passed, I'm like, yeah, it was kind of annoying, though. Chippendale Rescue Rangers was going to be a cool knockoff of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It had some okay moments in it, but then there was some twists and turns, and I'm like, oh, it would be great if they did this in the movie. One of my problems with movie going is I go to the movies and I'm like, gee, I hope they do this thing in the movie. It would be cool as I'm watching the movie. And then they don't end up doing it, and then they end up doing something really stupid, and I'm like, oh, why couldn't they just make the movie I saw in my head? What's wrong with you, movie? And that happens a lot. That's the problem. One of the hazards of being a movie geek is you've seen so many movies that you've already got a better movie in your head. Then there was Halloween Ends. A lot of people didn't like it. I liked it a lot. I thought it was very interesting, very different. And overall, I was a big fan of this new trilogy from David Gordon Green. I liked all three of them. And most people didn't. And most people have their opinion, and I have mine. I loved this movie. I thought it was a lot of fun. Very different, very much in the Friday the 13th Part 5 vibe, or Christine. But I like those movies. And a lot of people hate that movie, too. Friday the 13th Part 5 is a hated film. But I enjoy that movie. I also love Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Again, let's go to the bar and talk about it. I'll have a Shirley Temple. You have whatever you need to get through that conversation, because you're going to need some serious drinks. I'll be fine with my Shirley Temple, telling you why Friday's Revenge is a great movie. And then the last movie on this list that wasn't quite on my top 10, it wasn't quite on, and it was too good for Purgatory or Inferno, but a movie that I really enjoyed was The Menu with Ralph Fiennes. It's on HBO Max, I think, at this point. I think maybe because I worked in food service, I seem to relate to this movie a lot, but I thought it was very entertaining. It was very well structured. I really liked how the act breaks, not the 3 acts, but like the chapter breaks in the film were basically broken up as courses of the meal. I thought that was brilliant. Anya Taylor-Joy, I believe, was in it. She was great. Ralph Fiennes was amazing. Why didn't he get an Oscar nomination? I don't know. He really should have. But The Menu is definitely an interesting film, especially if you worked in food service. It's a must-watch, even if you don't like it. If you've ever worked in a restaurant or worked in food service, you've got to see The Menu. It lost me a little bit at the ending. The ending to me was a little bit, I don't know about this. But I will watch it again at some point, and I'll either say, yeah, I get it. Or I'll be like, I don't like it. So, 30 years of Army of Darkness. Army of Darkness is amazing. That was one that we didn't quite show in the film club, me and Dan Gator. We were going to show that. We didn't get around to it because we were so busy with our classes and our studies that we only ran the film club for about 2 years. And we also had we butted heads a lot with administration at the College of Staten Island, so we were not that interested in continuing the film club. The administration was okay. It was our advisors that were part of the film department that we had the trouble with. And every time we'd recommend a movie or we'd choose a movie, why are you showing this? Why are you showing that? Why? Because these movies are great. And the movies they wanted us to show, like, Breathless or Jules and Jim, good films. They have their place. I love them. I like Truffaut. I like Godard to a point. But if I have a chance to use that big screening room, I'm sorry. I'm going to show Phantom of the Paradise. I'm going to show RoboCop. I'm going to show Superman and Star Wars and all the movies that your bitter college professors hate. And they blame for movies being the way they are. It's all a matter of opinion, But anyway, I'm looking forward to some movies this year, not that many. I'm cautiously optimistic about some of these blockbusters. I'm more interested in DC than Marvel this year, which is sort of a switch, because usually DC I'm not that interested in, and they surprise me. Marvel has nothing this year except for Guardians, nothing this year that I'm interested in seeing. Actually, for the next couple of years, I'm not interested in their films that much. But, as always, the best films of the year are always the surprises. None of the films on my top 5 or top 10 lists were films that I was really anticipating that highly. They just took me by complete surprise. So, okay, guys, keep watching the movies. And we'll see you again at Mostly Movies. Thanks.